Good evening. This is Officer Kent LeBlanc. I'm going to share some of the information I plan on doing for our staff ride tomorrow. First thing I want to start with is the two leaders that I was assigned. So I was assigned both a Union leader and a Confederacy leader. And my Union leader is Winfield Scott Hancock. He was the commander of the Second Corps during all 3 days of the battle. He actually took command after the death of General Reynolds. And really, he was General Meade's right-hand guy. I like to sort of compare him, especially sort of using the Gettysburg movie as a reference, similar to the relationship that Lee and Longstreet had. Meade always knew that he could count on Hancock to get the job done, and get it done with style, honestly. Although he didn't have really a tactical role in the first day of the battle, he was the one who really decided to actually fight the battle in Gettysburg. So he was actually delegated the authority to sort of pick where he wanted to stop, where he wanted to sort of defend against the Confederate forces. So, after doing his leader's recon, Hancock decided on Gettysburg. Okay? And here's a quote from him, right? "I think this is the strongest position by nature upon which to fight a battle that I ever saw." When Howard, one of his fellow officers, agreed, Hancock concluded the discussion, "Very well, sir. I select this as the battlefield." So in a lot of ways, we have General Hancock to thank for fighting the battle here at Gettysburg. As I mentioned previously, he didn't do too much stuff during day one, but he did play an instrumental role in day 2 and day 3. Some of the highlights of what he did during day 2, he was really sort of the center of the Union line on Cemetery Hill. He spent most of the second day organizing the defenses there, setting up barricades and trenches and all the stuff that he could, which obviously, whenever we get to Pickett's charge, those defensive positions organized by General Hancock obviously played a pretty instrumental role in the ultimate Union victory. And also during day 2, he played more of a support role. He reinforced some of the Union lines in the wheat field, which was sort of a decisive point during the second day of the battle. Probably the most famous thing that he did during day 2 was he ordered the 1st Minnesota in a bayonet charge in order to buy time for defenses. I believe casualties were about 80%, 90% in the 1st Minnesota, but their bayonet charge sort of at this crucial time bought just enough time for the Union defenses to sort of get into play. And also, as part of his defense on Cemetery Hill, he had set up a stockade of artillery batteries on East Cemetery Hill. And throughout the course of the second day, he repelled multiple Confederate assaults. Then, of course, on day 3, with his position sort of in the very middle of the Union line, his corps was really the Union soldiers that bore the brunt of Pickett's charge. Seeing as Hancock and his soldiers were right there in the center of the Union line. He was the kind of leader who really led from the front. To sort of back that up, he was actually wounded during the battle. He ended up surviving and becoming an important political figure sort of the years following the Civil War. So the place that I really want to stop at is where Pickett's charge happened. And I think this will dovetail nicely, of course, with, I believe it's officer candidate Sloan's assignment of George Pickett in his infamous charge. So Hancock is just like one of these generals who just has like a wealth of wonderful little anecdotes and stories. So I want to share just a few of those with you so you can get an idea what kind of leader he was, how he was really present to his soldiers. So during the massive Confederate artillery bombardment right before Pickett's charge, which ultimately wasn't that effective, I believe the Confederates overshot, But while under fire, Hancock was very prominent on horseback. He was rallying his men, going back and forth, encouraging his troops. And the story goes that one of his subordinates protested, "General, the corps commander ought not to risk his life that way." And then Hancock was said to have replied, "There are times when a corps commander's life does not count." So as I mentioned previously, right, he was just the kind of general you want to see, the one who's not afraid to lead from the front, to serve as an inspiration to his men. And I actually have Ulysses S. Grant actually has a wonderful little passage about Hancock from his personal memoirs. It's a very complimentary piece, and I sort of want to read that in whole. It's got a very beautiful way of describing sort of the kind of leader Hancock was. So here's from U.S. Grant. Hancock stands the most conspicuous figure of all the general officers who did not exercise a separate command. He commanded a corps longer than any other one, and his name was never mentioned as having committed in battle a blunder for which he was responsible. He was a man of very conspicuous personal appearance. His genial disposition made him friends, and his personal courage and his presence with his command of the thickest of the fight won for him the confidence of troops serving under him. No matter how hard the fight, the Second Corps always felt that their commander was looking after them. End quote. Again, that just sort of reinforces the point I've been trying to make, right? He was the kind of general who was present, not just to some of his men, right? But everyone in the Second Corps really felt their commander, because of his personal courage, because of his presence in the battlefield, they knew that their commander was looking after him. Right? And like I said, he has so many stories about him, and I want to share a few more. I have a great deal of respect for this general here. So the story says that he actually refused evacuation until the battle was resolved, because, as I mentioned previously, he was actually injured during Pickett's charge. And because he was such an inspiration to his troops, because he courageously refused evacuation, he later received the personal thanks of the U.S. Congress for, quote, his gallant, meritorious, and conspicuous share in that great and decisive victory. And then, to sort of finalize, I have a quote from a military historian here. No other Union general at Gettysburg dominated men by the sheer force of their presence more completely than Hancock. As another wrote, his tactical skill had won him the quick admiration of adversaries who had come to know him as the thunderbolt of the Army of the Potomac. So again, Hancock was the kind of general who wasn't just respected by his own men. He was respected by the enemy as well. Even they were able to understand just how charismatic, how inspirational of a figure that he was. That's really... And this will tie in whenever I get to the discussion questions, because I really, my other leader is the Confederate General A.P. Hill, who in a lot of ways is sort of opposite of Hancock in terms of being present in the battle. So towards the end of this, I'll go ahead and share both the discussion questions, and we'll sort of look at A.P. Hill and Hancock sort of side by side and see what conclusions we can draw about it. But moving on to A.P. Hill, again, he was a Confederate general, and his main role during the battle was command of 3rd Corps. On day one, going back to the President's thing, A.P. Hill had a bad habit of getting sick right before battles. So I don't know if that was like a legit need of his, if he was somehow sort of intimidated by all the chaos of battle. There's actually a couple sources that mention that sometimes the gonorrhea that he got while sort of cavorting about at West Point was something that never really went away, and sometimes it flared up right before the battle. So really, from the very beginning of the battle, A.P. Hill was sick, right? He never really took an active role within the Battle of Gettysburg. But some of the generals under his command, sort of their claim to fame, disobeyed orders to avoid engagement. So men under A.P. Hill's command were actually the first to engage Union soldiers, which I believe Klein sort of covers in his little battle engagements. Also, men under the command of A.P. Hill, they pushed the First Corps of the Union back to Lutheran Seminary in the Gettysburg streets. So the men under A.P. Hill were really part of the apparent Confederate victory during the first day of battle. During day 2, again, he was out sick. He wasn't there sort of leading his men. But men under his command were part of the general assault of the Union lines. Because Lee had made the decision, he wanted to sort of take the high ground, and he wanted to sort of be as aggressive as he could. So it was A.P. Hill's job to sort of make sure the Union lines crumbled. Obviously, that didn't happen. Day 2 was much more of a stalemate. Also under his command, there was an artillery barrage on the Union right flank that was very ineffective, even though it lasted 2 whole hours. Guesses are the reason it was so ineffective, the Confederates sort of overshot. So most of the munitions, most of the cannonballs actually just went over the Union heads. They didn't do too much damage. And sort of ignominiously, sort of in day 3, Lee actually took 6 of Hill's brigades, and he gave him the Longstreet's command to sort of help supplement George Pickett's forces for the infamous Pickett's Charge. So that's just a little bit about A.P. Hill, and sort of contrasting him with General Hancock. Okay, so keeping both these generals in mind, right, they have very different temperaments, very different leadership styles. But their leadership style really centers down to either a presence or a lack of presence. So here's something to consider about General Hancock. So in contrast to A.P. Hill, who took no active part in the battle, Hancock was present to his men throughout. Let's think about this. Is it better to have sort of a king tactician, someone who sort of leads from the back lines but has a solid plan, i.e. A.P. Hill, who by all accounts was a pretty gifted tactician? Or is it better to have an inspiring leader? Which Hancock was no slouch on his tactics, but sort of his claim to fame is inspiring his soldiers. So something to consider, would you rather have a keen tactician who knows what he's doing, knows exactly where he's putting his soldiers, or would you prefer to have the kind of general who's there right in the front with you, inspiring you and leading you into combat? And that brings us to a larger general question. How does presence affect morale? Because that's always an essential part, especially during the Civil War, right? Whenever you just have masses of men. And typically the one who loses is the one who loses morale and routes. And something we consider from our own experience. Do you have any leaders in the Army National Guard or prior service, or even in the civilian sphere, who lead from the front, and what kind of impact do they have on you as a follower? And then to focus our question on A.P. Hill a little bit, by all accounts he was an effective leader of his famous Light Division, which had claim to fame in several important battles within the Civil War. But for Gettysburg, he was actually promoted to a corps commander. And by most accounts, he didn't do a very good job sort of commanding the Confederate Corps during the Battle of Gettysburg. So why do we think this would be? Why would A.P. Hill lack effectiveness as a corps commander? And then finally, I guess this question is directed more to soldiers who have been in the Army a little bit longer than just a 090 like me. But what qualities distinguish a good division commander from a good corps commander? All things to consider. Thank you.